U4 SDG Pandemic Edition.
Hi, I'm Tasha. Hi, I'm Francesca. Welcome to episode 2, Side B. In this episode, we'll be talking to Dr. Wayne about his work at Koh Sak and the inspiration behind his projects.
He also gives us some really good advice on how to get involved and what we can do to create a better world for ourselves.
We hope you find this episode to be interesting. Enjoy!
My name's Dr. Wayne Phillips. I'm a lecturer in Ecology and Conservation at Mahidol University International College.
So why did you start looking into waste recycling, and how do you manage waste? Could you please talk us through your projects and the inspiration behind them?
I'm an ecologist, and specifically, I've become a reef ecologist. My PhD was in kind of measuring photosynthesis, and I wanted to be able to continue with this work, and I continued it in the reef system because that was my original intention when I went back to do my master's, my PhD, to come back to Thailand, to actually sort out the problems that I observed in my daily activities. I do lots of different things, but they're all related to my work at Koh Sak. So what we're trying to do is to introduce this idea of training the tour guides so that they are better tour guides. I spent a couple of years following them around in the reef and observed what they did every time they went into the water. And from my observations, I know that the tour guides actively encourage people to destroy the reef because they don't know that the reef is actually a living organism. So what we're aiming to do is to upend the way tourism does things so that it is challenged and changed so it no longer causes a problem, and stop the long-term suffering of human society, because in the future we won't have a nice healthy reef system. And that healthy reef system provides all sorts of benefits, not just from the fish and the products that we consume, but also from the fact that we visit these islands and these reef systems. And that means there's lots of tourism dollars. So our aim really is to make things better. And the only way really we feel we can do that is through education, because education is key. Now that doesn't mean we go and give them a degree in marine biology or something. It does not need that. All it simply needs is for people to be made aware of the fact that the reef system itself is a living organism, and one that is resilient, but also fragile. And that fragility is key to the way we do things. And the way we do things in the reef system is incredibly destructive. So I took my students onto the island, and we walked from the north beach of Koh Sak, where all the tourism takes place, to the south of the island, where no tourists ever go. Depends upon the time of year. But when we got to the south of the island, it became very obvious, just by spending a couple of minutes of time looking at what waste we saw on the beach, that the waste was very local in source. So my idea was to be able to do something in safety on land before we could get into the water. And that really resulted in us kind of looking at the waste. And the first time we went there, we picked up everything on the South Beach and then began to classify it, put it into piles as to see what we could actually see. And on the first time we did this, we counted over 500 shoes on a beach that's only 90 meters wide. So we kind of figured, well, how can we kill two birds with one stone kind of thing? And that really made me kind of figure on, well, how can I raise the issue of threats to the integrity of the reef? And that included looking at the plastics. What I wanted my students really to figure out is, with plastic, there is no such thing as a way, because we tend to throw the plastic away and think we've done the right thing by throwing it into a rubbish bin. We need to raise the awareness of people, not when they come to the beach, but in the cities. And that's how we got involved with the Bangkok river cleanups that we got involved in over the last 2-3 years. So when we cleaned the beaches, not only did we pick up the big pieces, we began to investigate the small pieces of plastic. One thing I know about Koh Sak, for example, where I work, is the lack of awareness of the tour guides. Because the tourists will come to the boat, for example, and throw their plastic waste into the bin. But then through our observations and our counts, we know that those tour guides will then tie up that black bin bag and throw it over the side of the boats. So that's what the problem is. So our goal really is to interact with tour guides, but I'm looking for funding to actually go and train the tour guides to be better tour guides. Because if we train the tour guides so that they actually understand what the reef is and they know the potential threats to the reef, given the behavior that we perform, then we have this intention that training will challenge their behavior and modify their behavior so that they actually become constructive users of the reef rather than destructive users of the reef.
Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, he hasn't been able to go into the reef with his team. However, this is what he expects to see when he does go out.
I'm expecting big changes, not just in the amount of plastic waste that ends up on the beaches, but also the type of plastic waste. because COVID-19, clearly, because of the lockdown, people weren't going outside. So we anticipate to find more plastic bags. And unfortunately, in many areas of Bangkok itself, there is very poor waste management systems in place, if there is anything in place at all. I'm beginning to work with one group, TerraCycle Foundation, who are sort of installing these collection devices in the canals to actually remove the plastic before it floats downstream into the Chao Phraya River, and then of course into the marine environment. And most of that pollution comes from mismanagement. And that mismanagement is the roadside pickups, but also the behavior of people. And I know that the government banned plastic bags before COVID, but then during COVID, the only way that people could get food was through delivery. And of course, how do we deliver food except from plastic bags? And then how do we deal with that plastic waste when we have no waste collection system in place? Why don't you chuck it out the window? So it's a circular problem, and one that is relatively easy to solve if we know why people cause the problem in the first place.
What are your thoughts on the waste industry post-pandemic? For example, how does the pandemic change the waste found in waterways?
I know before COVID-19, the industry got together to discuss ways forward, because the industry itself was totally aware of the fact that plastic is a problem. They want to introduce this idea of circularity, which means less plastic in the natural environment. But with respect to the changes in waste found in waterways, I think there'll be more plastic waste with respect to food packaging, because that's how people were getting food. They were being delivered. I know, for example, that I saw lots and lots and lots of motorbikes for grab food moving about all over the place, transporting plastic bags filled with food. So of course that will end up in the waterways. But I also know that there is a real increase in the number of masks found in waterways. And that's a real cause for concern, because not only is that, well, it's pretty atrocious, but it's also a public health issue. Because once you throw that contaminated mask away, and we make the assumption that it is contaminated, we must, then of course it gets into the water. And if it gets into the water, where does it get to next? But after all of this COVID-19, I'm hoping that we'll begin to realize that the plastic is a problem, but what's a bigger problem is our behavior. And that behavior means that we really need to pay attention to the generation of waste in the first place.
So how do you think students can make a difference in this area and change the behavior of those who are careless in waste disposal?
Well, I've been to a couple of different schools now, and it's always incredibly encouraging that many of the school groups are moving towards like a plastic-free school, which I think is wonderful. So I'm hoping that students can educate themselves, find out more, but get involved. And I think the best way to get involved is either start your own cleanups or join other groups that do cleanups, so that you can understand what the true extent of the problem is and how we as individuals can actually help to solve that problem. Inviting people to come to your school to give a talk about what they do with respect to their research or activities. There are lots of different groups that are doing lots of different things. You can start, let's say, interacting with your local neighborhoods, because your local environment is something that we really need to be concerned about, because we can't deal with an environment on the other side of the world. We can think globally, but I'm sure you're aware of the saying, we must act local.
What goals do you have for the future, and how can high school students help you achieve them?
With respect to getting high school students to come and help, our intention is to link tour operators and school groups so that the operators and the school groups can work together to generate change. Because what I've noticed over the years is that many school groups, many conservation groups really want to do something. And unfortunately, many times they do something that's not quite right. And if they do that, then all that good effort is going to waste.
How can we persuade adults to become more conscious of this? And how can we persuade people who are empowered to make changes in the community?
That's a really good question. And it's something that everyone is asking, including us, because it's I was reading an article the other day that you cannot change people's minds by giving them facts. They just switch off. So I think you guys are in a better position because you're young, and it is up to you. Sometimes I feel that adults are intransigent. You can't change their minds. You can't change their behavior. But perhaps it's too late for them, but it's never too late for future generations, which is you guys. So what you ought to perhaps be doing is focusing on only the kids, challenging and raising them to be aware of what the problem is, because kids, you guys, have a fantastic opportunity to nag your parents. So it's up to you guys to really grab the ball and run with it. And it's your future. We screwed up. Undoubtedly, we screwed up. But that doesn't mean that you don't have to. You should learn from our mistakes and figure out what you guys need to do in order to have a better world for yourselves, because it sucks at the moment, and it will only get worse unless you guys do something about it. And it sounds awful that we're putting all of the blame, not blame, all of the way forward onto your young shoulders. But, well, if we want a better world, I think that's the only way to do it.
We hope you enjoyed this episode and that you can take some of the advice to use in your daily life.
Thanks for watching. Please share this video.